you are welcome back to class. And this is module 3, lesson 4. It should be, right? I guess that should be lesson 4, right? Um, yes, module 3, lesson 4 on the Scrum Master training. So, in the previous lessons, precisely from the first lesson, we looked at the essential roles of the Scrum Master, and I clearly mentioned that we should always picture those 8 characters of the Scrum Master. That will give us a broad um, um, knowledge to pull from anytime we need to explain or relate about who a Scrum Master is. And in the second module, we looked at what the Scrum Master does in the sprint planning meeting. The third module, we looked at what the Scrum Master does in the daily stand-up. So this is the fourth lesson where we would be looking at what the Scrum Master does also in the sprint review meeting. Um, Before I turn to the next slide, I want to assume what should be on your mind would be the first thing the Scrum Master does regularly, and that should be facilitating meetings. So let's see. I'm sure that is what we would have there. Okay, so what the Scrum Master does at the sprint review meetings. The first thing, just as I mentioned, is to facilitate meetings. And by now, I want to believe we all have good understanding what it means for the Scrum Master to facilitate those meetings. In actual sense, the Scrum Master puts the meetings together, scheduling the meeting. It is the role of the Scrum Master to schedule meetings. And I also mentioned that while scheduling those meetings, it should put the needed details of the meeting. No meeting invite should go out without the agenda for that meeting. It should be clear from the agenda of the meeting. Then, of course, when they finally meet at the meeting, is coordinating and facilitating. The work of that facilitation comes to bear at the meeting. When he's coordinating, is ensuring that the conversations or collaborations um, focus, the conversations focus on the agenda to which the meeting had been called. And of course, the time boxing comes to play and all the things like that. So I wouldn't want to stay so long on what facilitating meetings are. Um, but before we go further, just as a quick background for us, perhaps just to remind ourselves what happens during the sprint review meeting. The sprint review meeting comes up at the end of the sprint. Someone asked in someone sent a question across asking, when we say the sprint review at the end of the meeting, does it mean the last day of the meeting? I can remember precisely the trainee was asking if the team is running a 2-weekly sprint, um, that's 10 days. Does it mean that the sprint review happens on the 10th day? So do not fix your mind on the last day of the meeting. It could come differently. And in the explanation that we gave is that it could come differently. And there's what we call the team charter, or some teams call it working agreements. In that team charter or the working agreement, they have slight differences in those two, but they are for the same purpose. So in a team charter or working agreement, they would have clearly noted what day they would be having their sprint review meeting. Of course, the sprint review, being a review, cannot come early in the sprint. It will come at the latter end of the sprint, be it a day before the last day, be it on the last day, be it on the morning of the last day. Just have in mind that the sprint review meeting comes up at the end of the sprint. And what is more important is the purpose of that sprint review. And I mentioned in module 2, while we were looking at the sprint review, two things happen in the sprint review. One, the team is meeting with the stakeholders, showing the stakeholders what they've been able to commit to in the course of the sprint, what they've been able to do in the course of the sprint, and what is left to be done in the course of the sprint. That is important. That is often missed in most things we call as sprint review, because the sprint review is that window that the entire Scrum team sits down with the entire stakeholders, and they need to bring transparency to the workflow. Then the second thing that happens in the sprint review, which most persons refer to as the sprint review, is the demonstration of the value that had been delivered in the course of the sprint. So some organizations or some teams could refer to it as demo, calling sprint review also as demo. That is correct. Or some organizations could also, or teams, call it as showcase, showcasing a value that had been delivered, right? So um, those two things happen in the sprint review. So when they showcase, they will have the first hand feedback from the stakeholders. Of course, it's a meeting that has the stakeholders present. So the stakeholders are giving them the feedback there, and they are noting those feedbacks down. And I mentioned in the class for the sprint review that the product owner needs to take all those feedbacks in, note them, and of course a smart scrum master also would also note those that are happening in the from the feedback. So back to today's class, that's just laying the foundation, reminding ourselves what happened, um, those things that happen in the sprint review meeting. So we've discussed about facilitating meetings by the Scrum Master. Then, of course, the Scrum Master encourages participation, just as we've seen in other events. It's just the same way he's encouraging um, attendees' participation. So he wants the team to be able to have their say. I mentioned also in the last class that the sprint review is majorly led by the product owner, because the product owner owns the products that the team had developed. At the team level also, when each of the feature or any task or story is completed, it is that same product owner that accepts that work completed and says it's done. So the product owner takes that lead in the conversation, but of course the Scrum Master is there also ensuring that there is that cordial participation. There is that two-way communication from the team, from the Scrum team to the stakeholders, and from the stakeholders to the team. Then of course in all the workflow, the Scrum Master ensures transparency, where in the first side of the product of the review meeting, where it's necessary that the team quickly shows what they committed to, what they've been able to deliver on in that conversation, to enhance transparency, so that the stakeholders could know, okay, this is the progress that had been made. The product owner could take that advantage also to shed some more light on the progress done on the product roadmap or the project roadmap. The roadmap is the entire journey developing that product or that project. So in that first side of that review, the product owner could seize that moment to show the product roadmap for it. So ensuring transparency is one of the things the Scrum Master does, and it's important to keep conversations healthy. The Scrum Master is there to protect the team. Nobody wants a smart Scrum Master does not want blames on the developers in particular. So it's there to ensure that communications are civil, where it needs to engage with the 5 values of Scrum, talking about focus, openness, respect, commitment, and courage. Any of those values that is needed to ensure that conversations are healthy, the team members' psychological safety is kept high, morale of team members are sustained. The Scrum Master, of course, does that. The Scrum Master does not want a team that is demoralized. Of course, he could step in also to facilitate the demonstration of the value that has been developed. That is the increments. The increments is that shippable value that has been developed in the course of the sprint that is added to the ones that had been developed before. So that demonstration, that workflow pattern would be visible in it, of course. So the Scrum Master could step in to do that. And I mentioned earlier that the product owner makes notes on the feedbacks. A smart Scrum Master also would be picking up the notes as a way of balancing out. Perhaps something is left out, or something is forgotten, or there could be some improvement that could be noted, and the rest is taking notes. Which takes us to the next one, is also noting how the team could improve, gathering the feedbacks, um, looking at the work pattern, the workflow, and so it could be able to bring in some new suggestions to the team. Then, of course, addressing concerns and celebrating achievements. Where the team had done well, it takes that moment to applaud the team before the stakeholders. It's actually important. It does a lot of um, building morale for the team members. And one of the best practices in Scrum is what we call um, or one of the metrics rather in Scrum is what we call happiness metrics. And it says a happy team delivers value better, right? So the Scrum Master wants by all means to ensure that every little win is celebrated. And of course, it's a good time to celebrate that, to point that out, note that out before the stakeholders. That celebrating achievement happens again when we get to the sprint retrospective meeting, which is especially or essentially a Scrum team affair. There are no stakeholders joining them there. And the last one, of course, document feedbacks. Gather feedbacks, then now document those feedbacks. So those feedbacks will be actioned. And in actual sense, what the product owner does, and the Scrum Master is supporting the product owner to do, is the feedback gathered from the stakeholders are now brought into the workflow. They are brought into the workflow. And the best way to deal with that is to develop them back into the product backlog, and it becomes new considerations to be looked at for future sprints. So those are what the Scrum Master does during the sprint review. So the Scrum Master is not just folding his arms when the product owner is leading. Of course, there will be cases where the product owner may not attend. The Scrum Master can gladly step into that shoes and also be able to facilitate the conversations and demonstrate value before the product owner, the stakeholders. Of course, when we get to the practicals, we will see how all these things would play out, because you would be meeting with stakeholders, you'll be engaging with stakeholders, you'll be presenting different products you've developed to the stakeholders when we roll over to the practicals. And at that moment, the Scrum Master needs to sustain all those conversations. There must be shippable value at the end of each sprint, and you must have some deliverables demonstratable before the stakeholders. So when you have feedback from the stakeholders, those feedback must not be lost. They should be detailed out and brought into the workflow so that that will be harvested and there will be improvements as we go further. So that brings us to the end of this class. Looking at the what the Scrum Master does in the sprint review meetings. And the next class we'll be looking at what the Scrum Master does at the retrospective. All right, so if you have any questions, please note them down and you can always ship them across to me. I'll be glad to take some time to explain on them further. See you in the next class. Bye for now.